The most successful coaches never stop learning. They are committed to their personal growth and making themselves better. I'm Colby Donovan, and welcome to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. I'll speak with the world's most respected coaches, best-selling authors, and top business leaders to give you insight into their philosophies, lessons, and mindsets for you to apply to your own life. Head on over to coachingcoaches.co, where you can subscribe to this podcast and join some of the top coaches around the country who also enjoy our regular newsletter. My guest today is Kevin Eastman, who's a corporate and sports team speaker and previously spent 13 years in the NBA as both a coach and executive. He was the top assistant to Doc Rivers with the 2008 NBA World Championship Boston Celtics, and most recently served as an assistant coach and vice president of basketball operations with the Los Angeles Clippers. He's also the author of Why the Best Are the Best, 25 Powerful Words That Impact, Inspire, and Define Champions. In today's episode, we discuss how his passion for learning helped him break into the NBA, what makes Doc Rivers such a successful coach, the mentor-mentee relationship between Doc Rivers and Ty Lue, how Ty Lue's work ethic led him to become an NBA championship coach, how Ray Allen's famous preparation led him to become one of the best three-point shooters of all time, and the examples of extraordinary leadership he's seen during his corporate consulting work. Please enjoy the episode. Coach, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, Colby. I always appreciate people who are trying to put some experiences and maybe some knowledge that some people have out to others. And today I'm obviously being interviewed, but I also enjoy listening to them. So I get a lot out of these things as well.
Yeah, I think those who know you would definitely say that is something you've done a lot over your career and life, sharing and teaching others. And I've always enjoyed listening to you. So I'm excited for this today. For those who may not know you, I'm assuming most people do who are going to listen, but for those who don't, do you mind giving some background on how you broke into the NBA, your time in the NBA, and what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, what I'm doing now is probably what I should have done a better job of all my years in coaching, and that's being a husband to Wendy and a father to Jake. You know, sometimes we get so tunnel visioned in this profession of professional sports that we sometimes put things on the back burner that should definitely be on the front burner. So right now what I'm doing, and then I'll work backwards, right now what I'm doing is, well, up until the pandemic, was doing speaking engagements about 60 or 70 times a year in all parts of the world. So now that's been slowed with the pandemic, obviously. But I often get asked about my journey, and you know, a lot of people want to know where I've been. But I think even more important than that is what I've done to get to where some people may look and say, wow, that's a successful career. But where I've been is a college coach for 22 years and then an NBA coach for 13. And in between there, a couple of years being a consultant for Nike basketball. So in terms of how I got into the NBA, that was simply at its root was my curiosity. When I was working for Nike, I wanted to find out as much as I could about pick and rolls because we're going to work with the best high school and college players in the country. And obviously, when you're that good, your ultimate goal was to get into the NBA. So I knew these guys wanted to know what the NBA game was all about. And a big part of the NBA game was pick and roll offense and defense. So I felt I didn't know enough about it. So I called around to 4 or 5 of my friends in the NBA saying, you know, asking them, who could I speak to that has a real good knowledge of pick and roll offense and defense? And they all said the same name, or this name came up consistently in every conversation, and that was Brendan Surr. So I flew down, I called Brendan and I said, hey, would you mind giving me an hour to talk about pick and roll where I can pick your brain and ask you a bunch of questions? He said, sure, fine. But we'd have to do it in Orlando. So I flew down to Orlando where he was living, and I rented a room at a hotel and said, let's just meet in this little meeting room, and I'll just fire questions away. I'll have a dry erase board, everything. So that hour turned into about 8.5, 9 hours of me asking questions, us going back and forth. So unbeknownst to me, he got to know me a little more than probably he thought he might. Well, he had coached and even drafted Doc Rivers. And that particular year, Doc was contemplating getting back into the NBA. He had been let go by the Magic maybe a year or two earlier, and a number of teams were calling his phone to see if he would be interested in their job. So when Brendan and Doc were talking, Brendan must have mentioned my name to him. So that led to a meeting with Doc where we actually met at a Panera Bread in Orlando. And I can remember asking him a bunch of questions. And he did, if we were together for an hour, he did 58.5 minutes of talking. I did 90 seconds of talking. And probably 50 of those 90 where he asked me, how am I and what's my background? So he left there, and I guess Brendan and Doc talked afterwards. And one of the things Doc said to him is, I love talking to Kevin. Well, I didn't talk at all. So my curiosity was just to find out about pick and roll. And then it turned into Doc wanting to meet, and then me finding out all about how, his thoughts on basketball. So in a nutshell, the reason I am where I am today, I think, is my curiosity and my drive to continue to learn. So, but I started out as a graduate assistant in college at the University of Richmond, where I went to school. And then from there, had an opportunity to become a full-time at Colorado State, and then 3 or 4 other stops in college. But what I did at each stop is try to be as good as I could be at that stop. And my thought really wasn't on continuing to move up. It was just it was almost the fear of not being as good as the head coach I was working for thought I was. So that kind of drove me all throughout my career, and then eventually led to this opportunity to meet Doc Rivers. So that's a quick version of how I've gotten to where I've gotten.
You spent a lot of time with Doc after being hired there and then going with him to the Clippers. And in your book, you brought up the story of Doc's first meeting with the Celtics after you guys traded for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. And can you tell that story of how he handled that moment? Because that's obviously, team had a lot of pressure. You've now got a big three of KG, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce. And I thought it was great how he handled that.
Yeah, I think the one thing about Doc is he's going to put a great deal of thought to his messaging, especially the early messages in the beginning of the year, because that oftentimes sets the stage for the year and provides the reference point with which the really good coaches always go back to. So once we were able to trade for Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen, that put Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett, and Paul Pierce on the same team. And that preseason, a lot of people were saying, they'd be good, but maybe not quite good enough to win a championship this year. Maybe in years 2, 3, and 4 is when we'll really see the fruits of these trades and player acquisitions bearing. So once Doc walked into our very first meeting, you can just picture 15 guys in a U-shaped fashion, like many locker rooms are constructed, all of them sitting on their chairs, not knowing really what this new coach is going to say to them, meaning we had, I think, 11 of our 15 was it 11? Might have been 9. 9 of our 15 players were brand new, had never played for Doc Rivers, never been coached by Doc Rivers, even in a camp setting, never been around Doc Rivers. So we basically had a brand new team, and they were wondering, who is this guy? He was on TV working for ABC on Sunday afternoons or NBC, wherever he was, but he's been out of coaching for a couple of years, and he got let go in Orlando. So who is this guy?
He wasn't the Doc Rivers he is now walking into Philly.
No.
Yeah.
So they were all like normal guys would be. They're kind of just maybe sitting back in their seats. And after he said hello to him, he said the following. He said, guys, I just want you to know, in this room, there's enough in this room to win a championship. And all of a sudden, guys were going from leaning back on their chairs to everybody leaning forward, their elbows on their knees, their eyes just laser focused on Doc and waiting for what he would say next. So what he did that day was He gave them a clear understanding that he felt and he believed that we could win it all. Then the whole year was based on making sure that we got them to believe they could win it all. But once you know your leader believes, it's a little easier for you to believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great story. And I don't want to make this whole episode about Doc, but he's obviously one of the most well-respected coaches and successful coaches ever. And one thing that fascinates me with him is you have people, whether it's sports or the corporate world, where they're the CEO, they're the head coach, they're the GM, and they want to look the smartest and be the smartest on the team. And maybe, I don't know if it's insecurity or what, but that happens a lot. And if you look at his staffs over the years, looking back now, I mean, he had guys like Tom Thibodeau, NBA head coach, Lawrence Frank, NBA head coach, brought in Flip Saunders to consult. He had people like yourself, people like Mike Longobardi. Why do you think he felt so comfortable bringing in other people who were really damn smart and really damn good? And how do you think he was able to attract those kinds of people to want to work with him, like yourself?
Yeah, well, the attraction part was easy. He's a great person, first of all, high character guy, and a very knowledgeable guy. So if you're sitting next to him on the bench or you're sitting with him in meetings, you're going to grow and learn. And all those guys you mentioned, all of them were exactly the same as Doc, because Doc looked for one thing in particular. He wanted guys who didn't know it all. He wanted guys who were still constantly learning, still had a curiosity about them. And, Colby, you've heard me speak before. I often mention there's two types of people in this world. There's two types of coaches in this world. There are know-it-alls and there are learn-it-alls. And Doc was a learn-it-all. And when you are a learn-it-all, that means you have a vulnerability about yourself. You have a humility about yourself. And that vulnerability and humility basically screams out, I don't know enough. I need to know what you know to get better at what I'm doing. So the other name that that I should mention that he had on staff was Ty Lue. Ty was the only one who actually won a championship, right? Beyond Doc. So he wanted guys who would question him. He wanted guys who would challenge him. And he also wanted guys to know that the end of that debate that we may have had about how to play the pick and roll or how to use Paul Pierce better at the elbow, once we debated and even had our disagreements, he knew when we left that room we were committed to his decision, because he was the head coach. And whatever he finally decided after listening to all of us, we were going to make sure that we sold that to our team. And I think that's an important piece. We don't have to agree when we're coming to the point of trying to find the solution. But once a solution, someone has to make the final choice, and it's the head coach. And then if we're a good enough staff, we're going to push that and sell that as well and be committed to it once we leave that office.
We've got an episode coming up with Annie Duke, former poker player and expert decision strategist. She's phenomenal, and she talks about the exact same thing, that the reason we have meetings as teams is not to come together and agree. It's for all of us to state our opinions, whether they agree or disagree, and then the leader makes a decision because they're more informed. So you're basically saying the same thing as her. So great minds think alike. I want to touch on Ty Lue more. I forgot to bring his name up, and you bring his name up. But the story, there's a great article which I read a couple years ago about Doc and Ty's relationship and how that started. And I'm gonna link that in the show notes. But can you kind of talk about Doc's impact on Ty Lue and the fact that Doc was the first guy who brought the idea of coaching to him?
Yeah, well, just like Pat Riley brought coaching to Doc, Doc played for Pat Riley with New York, and he kept telling Doc, you're going to be a coach one day. And, Doc was like every player. There's no way I want to even get close to being a coach. Let me go in the TV booth and tell you what you should have done, and then not worry about the game tomorrow night. I'm going to worry about now, should I go to an Italian dinner here or should I go to a Mexican place? So what Pat Riley did for Doc did for Ty Lue. And the most important thing they did was to, first of all, introduce the idea that you can be really good at this. And then, kind of like I was saying in that locker room before the year started, where Doc said, I think we have enough in this locker room to win the title this year, right? He started to get them to understand he believed in them. Well, Pat Riley and then Doc with Ty, he believed in Ty maybe before Ty believed in himself. So the best story I can give you about T. Lue, other than if you can name somebody who does not like Ty Lue, go at it, because you're going to have to spend about 7,000 years trying to figure out who that is. Because Ty has this unique ability. He's Velcro. He's Velcro. When you meet somebody, they stick, right? Because he's such a good person, high character. Well, when we were at the Clippers, I can't remember exactly who left, but anyway, we needed a new defensive coordinator. And Doc originally kind of approached me to be that. And I said to him, I don't think I'm the best guy to do that. I think what the role you have me in right now, even though that other role would give you a lot more notoriety and that sort of thing, but the role I was in currently, I thought was the best role for me to give the best to Doc. So he eventually told Ty Lue, hey, would you be willing to be our defensive coordinator? And Ty thought about it a little bit because, that had to automatically amp up his workload and maybe even change some of his daily habits. So eventually Ty said, yeah. Well, the next few days, my office overlooked the court out there in LA. And I remember one day looking down and seeing Ty Lue in there by himself. And he's on one of the half courts. Picture him at the top of the key, facing the basket. And he's pointing all around and kind of moving his pointing finger to different spots on the floor. And his mouth was moving. Of course, I couldn't hear what he was saying. So I watched it day one. I watched it day two. I watched it day three. I finally asked him, what are you doing? And he said, this was on day three, I think. He probably doesn't even remember this. And he said, well, before I put in any of these drills, because Doc's told him you're going to have the summer league team and you're going to have to put in every single drill that we're going to put in next year, but put it in and get a trial run with the summer league team. Most of those guys won't make the roster. It'll give him some experience of actually putting the drill in and actually correcting the drill and being the head coach, right? So I asked him, what were you doing? And he said, well, Doc wanted me to put the drills in, and I figured I better become good at this. So I just went out on the court and was walking around. And what he was saying that I didn't hear, he was saying, okay, now, DJ, I want you to start on the block, and I want you to sprint up to the top of the key and set a pick and roll. Now, Chris Paul, I want you to come off that pick and roll. Now, here's how we're going to defend this. The guy who's guarding the big, you're going to be in a show. We want you up the floor. We want 10 toes pointing to the sideline. We want to make sure that you make that guard. And he was going over every single teaching point of every single defensive drill that we had in our repertoire. Then he got on day 4, he got our video group. And you've been around basketball enough. The video guys think they can play, but they can't. And if they can play at all, the only part of basketball they know is the offensive end. Well, Ty had some bad students, right, in the video room that he had to teach how to guard pick and rolls, how to do our 4-out drill, how to do our post-trap drill. Whatever the drills were, he taught them. And he was actually physically touching them and moving them around. So that gives you an idea that Ty Lue wasn't an overnight sensation when he won the title with Cleveland. There were many years in a dark gym when he was the only one in the gym, talking to himself, but pretending players were there. That's why Ty Lue is Ty Lue.
That's such a great story, and I'm glad you shared that because it, like you said, some people may look at it and be like, oh, well, he played the NBA, then he got the coach, good for him, but it is what it is, but obviously it wasn't that. It was a lot of hard work over time. What do you think, because Doc did not coach Ty Lue, correct? So what did Doc see in him to say, hey, I think you can coach, and then also want to pursue, what made Doc pursue that with Ty? Because Doc had a great staff. I'm sure he was busy. He had to coach the Boston Celtics or the LA Clippers and all this stuff. But he wanted to, like, what made Doc want to approach Ty about that?
Yeah, Ty played for Doc in Orlando, I think, for
Okay. Okay.
what did they play in the
Okay.
NBA? A cup of coffee, like a quick. It wasn't like 5 years. So he got to see him on an everyday basis, and I think Ty may not say this, but he is one of those guys who maybe even got more out of his natural talent, or maybe lack of natural talent. He got more out of himself, and he really knew the game, and he could see the game like in real time. Some coaches know that maybe in the pick and roll something went wrong, and then they're not quite sure because they couldn't see all five defenders on their team. So it's kind of okay. We got to correct that tomorrow in practice. Well, yeah, you correct it tomorrow in practice after you've lost the game the night before because you didn't change and adjust during the game. Ty was able to see that. And Ty kind of was the proverbial coach on the floor. So I think Doc saw all those things, and he just had to get, like every NBA player going into the coaching ranks in the NBA, the biggest thing you have to change is your work habits. It's not a 2-hour practice anymore. It's a 16-hour day preparing for those practices and games. So it's a little bit different. And, I'll say it again. And I remember, I think it was Beyonce. I watched a documentary one time on her, and she said something like, I think it was Beyonce. It might have been Jennifer Lopez, but I'm always trying to watch things of people who have made it to the top of where they, in their craft. And one of the two of them said, maybe both at some point, I don't know, but they said, it took me 15 years to become an overnight sensation. And it took T. Lou all those years of playing, and then little things that became big things, like that story of it being in the gym by himself to become that world championship coach.
And do you think that Ty, I'm fascinated by this idea, like you said, of the people who get to the top of their profession. Do you think that Ty did a better job, or it was easier for him to adapt to the 16-hour-a-day job than other former players do? Do you think that Doc coached him, or the whole staff kind of coached him up over time to show him that, this is how it is as a coach instead of a player? Why do you think he's been able to make that transition and thrive in it, obviously, with the Cavs, and now he's another head coach with another team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's currently just been named the head coach of the Los Angeles Clippers. I think that the foundation of it all was that Ty had respect for Doc. So therefore, when you respect and you trust the person talking to you, you're willing to do what they say, or execute what they ask you to execute. And the first task that Ty had, even above and beyond putting in all our stuff for the summer league team, was that he asked Ty to go over every single game we played and write up a report from a defensive perspective during our summertime, right, in the off season. And Ty did that to a T. So I think what helped Ty was his willingness to do these things, right? And it takes time. Like habits don't change overnight. But because Doc, you could arguably say, forced these assignments on him, look, it's either you do it or you don't. And you either thrive or you embarrass yourself. Ty's too competitive to embarrass himself. So, and now, now he's kind of like he's not Doc because he has his own way of thinking, Ty does. Everybody thinks, well, gosh, how can the Clippers change if Ty Lue, who's been mentored by Doc, is the new coach? He's learned a lot of things from Doc. But what the best of the best do is take what they've learned. They spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about what they've learned. They put it and internalize it into their own way of thinking, their own way of verbalizing it, their own way of teaching it. And then it becomes who they are, right? So everything Ty Lue does isn't, Doc Rivers. He was other, he even used to tell me how important Scott Skiles was to his career. And no one ever mentions Scott Skiles when they talk about T. Lou. So he's taken from everybody. But the biggest thing he's done, he spent a lot of thought time by himself. Okay, how can I use this? How can I verbalize this and sell this in such a way that my players will believe in it and do it? Because it doesn't matter how much you know, it's how much they do about how much you know.
Speaking of hiring and moving up and getting jobs, you run a workshop for coaches about interviewing and trying to move up in the profession. Can you talk about some of the things you focus on that you think is really important for people to hear?
Well, I think first of all, everyone has to understand it's hard to get a job today because there are so many people competing for that exact same job. So what I try and do whenever I'm helping a coach is to get them to understand the other side of the desk, right? What would they be looking for? What would an athletic director be looking for? If you are a young assistant trying to get maybe an assistant at a job at a higher level, what is that head coach looking for? So whatever they're looking for, you have to start to do those things where you are, right? So, there are so many things that go into it, but the first thing is I always tell them to study the craft. Because two things people can say to you, especially if you're going after a head coaching job and you've never been a head coach. Number one is they can say, oh, well, he or she has no experience. And then many people just stop there. They say, well, every time I interview, they always say, well, yeah, you were good, but you don't have any experience.
It's like the entry-level job out of school that requires 5 years of experience.
Yeah. But instead of 5 years of experience, because you can't get that, it's impossible to get that. Maybe you can do it through a work study or that type of thing, an apprenticeship, whatever. Instead of like 5 years of work experience, take your 4 years of college and maybe your last 2 of high school where you're starting to figure, like, I might want to do that when I grow up. Then start studying the crap out of that. Because the other thing they can say is, wow, you don't have any experience, but you sure know a heck of a lot about this job. You almost know as much as people have been here for 2 years. Make them say that. Because shame on us if we can't find out more than we know today about the job we want to have. Hey, I'm kind of studying the Miami Heat right now because I always like to give real-time examples. When you look up either Pat Riley, Eric Spoelstra, LeBron James, whatever, there are over 20 million articles or blogs, right? Or 10 million. I don't know exactly the number, but I can't read them all. But I have already started, as a matter of fact, right before I went on this call, I just started taking notes. I just call it Miami Heat Culture. And I've already got 3 pages worth of things that I didn't know. And I know Eric. Things that came out in articles where he might have only said it like 2 times in his life, but I was able to capture it and learn about it, right? So what I try and get them to understand is study your craft, read about it, watch YouTubes. If you have a chance, I know you don't make a lot of money, right? So maybe you can take somebody out to coffee. I would never ask someone to meet me for dinner when I was young because I didn't have the money to pay for the dinner. And I learned from my dad is whenever you take somebody out, you always offer to pay the bill, right? My wife always gets mad at that, but it's just a habit my dad taught me. Well, I can pay for it, just hoping he doesn't want a venti soy latte, right? That's now $6. I'm hoping he or she, if I'm talking to them, maybe wants just a small cup of regular coffee for like $2. I can do that. So I look for those opportunities. The other thing that I talk about that not many people do is you probably can't reach the decision maker because you don't have that experience, right? But can you reach the people who have the ear of the decision makers? Because sometimes they will give you their time. The assistant athletic director, the assistant coach to the head coach at maybe, I don't know, DeMatha High School, whoever Mike Jones's assistant coach is. Maybe you can reach him, right? And get to know what they do. And maybe during that, they'll get to know you too. And then you always have to start thinking ahead to what questions might be asked and start to formulate some of the basic ones, like what is your philosophy, right? What are your strengths? What might be some of your weaknesses? What is a challenge that you had to overcome? Who do you look up to in this profession and why, right? Who do you look up to in other sports that you can apply to the sport of basketball? Whatever those questions might be in the interviews, start thinking about them now, because as you mentioned my book earlier, before we went on this podcast, and I wrote the book so that people can understand what do the best do in their professions to get to where they are. And one of the things I talk about is preparation, and I define preparation as be there before you get there. Be there before you get there. So with that question, the questions that the interviewers may ask, the athletic director or the president or maybe the owner of an NBA team will ask you, be there already. Anticipate those. Go over how you would say it. Practice it in the mirror. Because those people who get the job, they're every bit as maybe doubtful and maybe even a little scared, a little tentative when they're going into that interview. So everybody's in the same club, but some people are prepared more than others.
Some people have been on the court all alone, barking out how they're going to coach drills in Summer League when they're just named the defensive coordinator of the LA Clippers, like Ty Lue. So there's a real example of that too. So let's say I'm an assistant coach. I'm trying to be a head coach. I take your advice. I'm trying to learn as much as I can, X and O's wise, leadership wise. I study the culture of the Miami Heat. How do I then, when I'm sitting down with an AD, explain that in a kind of normal conversational way that this is my passion? I am studying the craft over time. I am spending time on a Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning for 2 hours reading about the Miami Heat's culture. Like, how can you portray that so the AD, the owner, the coach, whoever it is, gets that from you?
Well, I think you have to figure out how to weave things in to whatever question is asked. Like, I think going into an interview, you should have 1, 2, or 3 points that you want to make sure that when they leave there, everybody leaves the room, they know this about you. Whatever those are, whatever they are. For me, it was that I'm going to continue to study, to grow, to develop, and to improve. And because of that, I'm going to hire an incredible staff that will challenge my thinking, right? So whatever it is that you want them to get, because what you can do, if you're savvy enough, even if they never ask that question specifically, you can weave it into something. You know, maybe they're asking you about what you and your wife do in the off season. And you're talking about, well, we always like to have family time, and we're always going to take we want to visit the rest of the family around the country. We want to spend some quiet time alone. We want to do fun things with our children. And then, of course, Mr. Athletic Director, and my wife even promotes this with me. I always find 1 to 2 hours to etch into my day of growth, development, and improvement. Right. And then, boom, I go off. Right. So that's how I would do it. And the other thing is, whenever you're starting to say, this is how I would run our program, like whatever it is, these are the 5 things that are most important in our culture. When the AD asks you about culture, what will your culture be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on number 3, it might be, and I've done a lot of studying in the Miami Heat, and it's one of the components of their culture too, that they felt helped them win the championship. All of a sudden, the AD connects, dang, he's got a championship culture.
If you enjoy this podcast, I also write a weekly newsletter sharing the best content I found in the last week that directly applies to coaches. Some of the best coaches in the world subscribe, and it's free. So go to coachingcoaches.substack.com or check out the link in the show notes to subscribe. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.substack.com. Let's get back to the episode. So I'd love to start going through some of the topics you cover in your book, Why the Best of the Best, and you just touched on preparation, and people may not remember now, but when Ray Allen was playing, it's felt like every May and June we'd see him on ESPN doing his pregame shoot around that's now kind of become famous, or pregame shooting routine. Can you talk about your involvement in that and what Ray did before every game and over the course of the season?
Well, most of the best have a routine on regular days and on game days. And for Ray, it was he wanted to be on whatever floor. If it was a home game, it would be the Boston Garden. If it was an away game, whatever that arena was, 3 hours before game time was when he wanted to do his pregame shooting. So myself and Mike Longobardi, one of the other assistant coaches, we would always get in the cab, the three of us. Mike and I would get down first. We'd call a cab. Ray always would be there, like at the time he would say he was going to be there. So we knew it was clockwork. We'd get in the cab, all three of us in the back seat, boom, drive to the – no, Longo would always be in the front seat.
I was going to say that'd be a great photo of the three of you huddled in the back.
Yeah, we always put Longo in the front seat because if the guy got lost, Longo would be all over the cab driver. Where are you going, man? We got a future Hall of Famer in the back seat. We got to get to, typical New Yorker, right? Typical Italian New Yorker. So Longo was the best, and he often would kind of put a smile on our faces the whole time. And Ray and I would look at each other like, oh, man, there he goes again. So anyway, so we get there and we'd be out and we just go through his shooting routine. And all of the shots were the shots that he would get within our offense. The biggest shot of his career, people probably remember, was the one he hit for the Miami Heat in the right corner in Game 6 to send the game into overtime. And it was a killer for the San Antonio Spurs. And eventually the Heat won the game. Well, people knew, my friends knew that in Boston, we would always go to the gym and shoot with Ray, right? So when he hit that shot, I got a couple of texts like, oh, man, he's so lucky. He's always in those situations. And I would always write back, no, that's not luck. That's called preparation. You see, Ray would do drills where he actually would speed backpedal. He would start in the lane, and then he would speed backpedal, full speed to behind the three-point line. We would throw him the ball. He'd shoot it. Then he'd run back into the lane and speed backpedal to another area behind the three-point line. Throw it to him and shoot it. You see, Ray was already there before he got there. Ray had taken that shot thousands of times in his career. And actually, the way he got there, he had executed it thousands of times. A lot of people, when I asked him about that shot, they said he ran to the three-point line. No, he didn't. He backpedaled. And then he had the wherewithal not to look down because that could have wasted a second, right? He knew where he was in the court. So Ray had been there thousands of times before, and he was the epitome of preparation. But so was Kevin Garnett, right? So was Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce was always on the treadmill on game days. We were like, get off the treadmill, save your legs, but it was part of his routine. He wouldn't have been Paul Pierce that night had he not done the treadmill that morning. Before we went into our shoot around. So what you find is so many guys, they're already there before the big moment hits.
And so at what point in his career did he start having that game day routine? Do you know? Was it always that way when he came into the league, or did he develop it over time for some reason?
He developed it early in his career. I don't know exactly what year.
And do you think he developed that routine? I'm always fascinated. You talked about it early on in the episode with yourself of wanting to be prepared out of kind of fear that the coach wouldn't trust you enough or think you knew enough. Do you think he was that way out of fear of not doing well, or like the drive to be great? Or just that was the routine and that's who he was by the end of his career?
My guess is, knowing Ray, he's a tremendously observant person. He probably observed some of the players that he played with during his early years and saw what they did. I don't know that because I've never asked him that. But I never sensed that Ray had a fear of not doing well as much as he maybe never wanted to be in a position where he wasn't prepared for it. Just because when you're prepared for it, what I often say, whether I'm speaking to corporate audiences or sports audiences, is that preparation trumps pressure. You'll have butterflies when you're really, really prepared well. You'll have fear when you're not prepared well. Butterflies are natural, right? That means that you care about this game you're going to play, or you care about this presentation you're going to give in front of the VP and the president of the company, right? So I think it's more that with Ray. The best understand how important preparation is.
And why don't, I would think, and obviously, everyone has their own routine, but I'm thinking if I'm another younger guard on the Celtics or I guess in the Heat later in his career, and I see the greatest three-point shooter of all time doing this before every single game and taking more shots, even though he's a better shooter than everyone else in the league, maybe ever. Why don't you think other people would pick that up more and say, I'm going to emulate this, because if Ray Allen's doing it, he's the best shooter of all time, I should be doing that myself too?
Well, sometimes they don't know what they don't know. They've never even had an example of someone actually doing that, right? Not so much doing the work every day, but someone who wasn't doing the work saw someone who was doing the work, then they started doing the work themselves and their career took off. They've never even seen that maybe. So I think one of the things that Doc always used to say is, they don't know what they don't know. And the other thing he used to say in staff meetings, you've been in staff meetings, and maybe, it probably happens in the corporate world too. We always talk about the things that our team is not doing. Man, we're not doing this. We're not doing that. Man, Blake isn't doing this. Paul's not doing this. Doc used to always say, don't tell me, tell them, right? So my guess is, because Ray is so observant and maybe others aren't observant, he saw, or he had someone in his career. It could have even been back at UConn. I know there was a story about workouts in UConn that showed him, look, if you really want to get to where you want to go, this is what you have to do. A great example of this example is J.J. Redick. When he signed with the Sixers, he's now with the Pelicans, but when he signed with the Sixers, I remember talking to Brett Brown, who was their coach at the time. And Brett asked me, what do I need to know about JJ? And I said, I don't know that you really need to know anything about JJ other than this. Tell all of your players to watch him every day. That's all they need to do. And they will see what the definition of a professional is. Not someone who plays in the pros, because there's 450 players that play in the pros. There's not 450 professional players. JJ's work ethic, his routine. It's amazing. You know what? In all of my career, with some of the great shooters I've had a chance to be around, the one thing that's true for all of them and consistent, they usually take the most shots of anyone else in practice, meaning they get extra shots before practice and after practice. There's a reason the best are the best. They put the time in, right? JJ has a shooting routine every single day, game day included. Some non-shooters don't.
Another thing you talk about in the book is the idea of accountability, and in the way you described it was with Doc Rivers and KG taking accountability for losses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, whenever things didn't go well, Doc was the first, even publicly, to say, I got in the media, I got to do a better job at, and then fill in the blank. He would actually say that. He would rather take responsibility for the losses and not put it on the players. And then when we won the game, he would talk about what the players did well, right? So, the better players and the better coaches, the reason they're willing to be accountable is because they know over time, with all the work that they have put in, things will even out. Mm-hmm. And if I was part of the reason why we didn't win tonight, I should publicly state that this is why, right? Because what you find out is, on winning teams, there's a culture of accountability. On losing teams, there's a culture of blame and victimization. Another thing Doc used to always say is, if you want to be a champion, you can't play the victim. Meaning, oh man, things always happen to us. Gosh, we're always in this situation. Because what happens if you play the victim is, if you feel that people aren't seeing it that way, then you start to blame. Well, it really wasn't me. It was Rondo, he didn't get there in time. And then once you start blaming, you can just start to see the cracks in the organization of the team start to form, right? And once cracks form, the foundation begins to crumble. And it's very difficult to recover from. So I think the reason they do it is because it's the right thing to do. They don't blame others. They hold themselves accountable. Two things you have to be if you want to really be good at something. You have to be responsible and you have to be accountable. Responsible means do your job. Whatever your job is or your role on that team in that company, do that every day and do it to the best of your ability. And then accountability is your word to the team that I'll understand, execute, and hold myself to all I have to do to contribute to the successful completion of the team goals. And if I don't do those things, I'll let you know that was my fault today.
Another one of the words you talked about, and I want to read the definition because I loved it so much, was sacrifice. Sacrifice is giving up something you may really want for something bigger that may not happen in the future. In other words, sacrifice becomes a decision to go against the pull of human nature to look out for oneself. When you're in Boston, you guys have the big three who are all stars in their own right. You have Rondo, who, towards the end became a star. How did you as a staff get those guys to all sacrifice? And how much was it that it sounds like that's just kind of in KG's blood. I don't know about the other guys, but how much was it just it was who they were, and how much was it you guys had to coax that out of them as time went on?
Well, we had to believe that it was in there somewhere. So Doc talked about sacrifice all year long. It wasn't just at the beginning of the year in our first meeting with the team at the dinner before we started training camp the next day. It was consistent throughout. And if he saw examples of sacrifice, even during a timeout, he might say it. Hey, that was Ray. That was a great job of throwing one more pass because Paul had a wide open shot. That's what we need to do, guys. This is how we get to where we want to go this year, right? Don't be afraid to sacrifice, because if we all sacrifice, eventually what we want out of the year will come to us. Right? Because the one thing you do find out about teams that win championships, they were willing to sacrifice. But, sacrifice really is something that you do for the team. And I think you should think of it that way, right? It's not always something that you're giving up. So what we tried to do when we formed the team, the best way to have a team that sacrifices is to bring in players who are willing to sacrifice. So the people we brought in, we knew part of their DNA was that they're okay with maybe giving up some shots, some points, some articles, that sort of thing, some TV interviews. They're willing to do that to reach the ultimate goal of winning a championship. But sacrifice isn't something you can force on people. You have to hope that you have enough people who are important to the organization, to the company, or in basketball, your best players. You have to hope that you have enough of your best players who are willing to sacrifice, and then they see that, gosh, the best players are doing that. I probably need to do that too. And if you have enough on the team, and there might be one unselfish player, you can surround that player by players who sacrifice, and players who are willing to tell that player who won't sacrifice, willing to tell them the truth about, hey man, if you want this team to get to where it wants to go, you can't do what you just did. That was selfish. You have to have players who are willing to talk to other players, and players who are willing to hold other players accountable.
So if I have a team that is, we don't have a Kevin Garnett, we don't have stars on our team who are unselfish, right? You've got, I feel like at almost all levels in all sports, at some point you hit your ceiling of when unless you're LeBron James or Kevin Durant, you get to the point where, okay, I'm not the best player. I can't just do my thing all the time. I have to sacrifice for the team. So if you have a team that has one of those guys, I guess it's having his come to Jesus moment that I can't keep doing the way I'm doing and be successful, or the team's not successful that way, and you don't have stars who can show them the way. How do you as a coach try to coax that out of them over time when it's not something that's in their DNA or they haven't had to do that before?
Well, if you're in college or the pros, shame on you for having a team of all selfish players, right? That, that's that's your fault, not theirs. Okay. Obviously, in high school, you may not have that luxury. If you know some part of someone's makeup is to kind of be truly unselfish, then you got a decision to make. Excuse me, truly selfish. You probably got a decision to make. Do I want that person on my team? Right. So a lot of it starts with leadership, letting them see you making some sacrifices, whatever the sacrifices are. Guys, I would love to practice on Saturday mornings at 9 to 11 because then I can have the rest of the day with my family. Well, maybe the players really want to practice from 2 to 4. So maybe you make that sacrifice, and then at home you do your family time from 9 to whatever 2, right? So you can do some things that show them that you're sacrificing too. You can let them know that you did spend the night last night watching that film. You sacrificed some of your sleep to make this team better. However, you can do that in your leadership role. And then the other thing is, we talked about sacrifice, but we talk more about fulfilling your role. And a role is not about what you can't do. A role for good teams is, this is the value you bring to the team. And if you can provide this value each and every game, we're going to have a chance to get there. And one of the values may be that you don't get to shoot as much as, say, Paul Pierce and Ray Allen do. But if you can be great at your role, like Doc used to say, be an all-star at your role, that alone is a sacrifice. And then you're better players, because no matter if you are the worst team in the league, you still have a best player or players on your team. They're just not very good, right, compared to the rest of the league. But they're your best players. So if you can really work with those best players to get them to understand, because Ray Allen took 6 less shots per game than his normal per game average when he came to the Celtics. 6 less shots for Ray is probably, well, he's probably going to make 2 threes, so there's 6 points. He's going to make 2 more because he'll probably shoot 4 out of 6 every time. There's 4 more. That he's given 10 points a game, right? Minimum. Kevin also shot less shots per game. So did Paul. They were willing to sacrifice that up front. So, I oftentimes with players use examples of other players and other teams. And in pro sports, it's a little bit harder, so I might use other sports. Like, hey, Tom, when we were in New England, Tom Brady said this, right? Or Tom Brady, when he threw 6 TD passes, didn't even talk one time about any of those passes. He talked about the line, giving him the protection to actually throw those passes. He sacrificed some of his own glory in those articles for bringing up the offensive linemen, right? So it's not an easy thing. If you have a team of if your team is laden with selfish players, that's not an easy thing to change. But I know this, if you do nothing, it'll remain that way.
Yeah, and I think those examples of you sacrificing as a coach for them and then providing constant examples of other really successful people for them to hear over time is a great advice for coaches to try to implement. One of the things I see all the time now is people talking about why ego is bad and leave your ego at the door, and ego kills your potential, I think Rick Pitino says. And Ryan Holiday's got the book Ego is the Enemy. So I was really surprised with what you said about ego in the book. So can you kind of explain your thoughts on the ego and how we should all think about that?
Well, I think what Rick and Ryan are talking about is a loser's ego. A loser's ego is all about me, like my touches in a game. How many times do I touch the ball? How many times do I get to shoot it? How many points do I get to score? How many articles are written about me? I don't care what the final outcome of the game is, so long as I got mine. Therefore, I'm in the articles as having a good game, even if our team lost. That's a loser's ego. I believe you should bring your winner's ego to everything that you do, because it's what gives you the confidence. Now, what's behind a winner's ego? It's the Tai Lu in a gym by himself, verbally going over all the drills that he was going to put in every teaching point. It's Ray Allen shooting in a gym with dark lights when no one else is there except me and Longo, right? A winner's ego is all the work that went behind the time that the game starts. And if you put that work in, you should feel good about yourself. You should feel good going into the game, that any situation that arises, you're prepared for. Any last second shot where you have to backpedal to take that shot, you've been there before. So a winner's ego is, I have put in the work. I should feel confident. I should go in there with a positive mindset. I should know that I'm prepared for almost anything that might be thrown my way. We would want that ego from our guys because that's part of what got them to be that good. But we don't want the loser's ego. And you got to talk about both.
No, I love the delineation between the two. And about the time I was reading your book and that part of it, I saw something about the idea that if we all in life didn't have somewhat of an ego, we wouldn't go do things, right? I wouldn't go try a new job. I wouldn't try to go to college and learn new things. John Doe wouldn't go try to open up a restaurant when 80% of restaurants failed. Like, the guys who are playing at that level are trying to do something that is really damn hard, and you kind of have to have that winner's ego, like you said, to be able to have that swagger to get it done and try that. So I love that delineation. The one last thing I wanted to ask you from the book is, and I'm a huge sucker for these kind of motivational tactics and stories. You talked about what Doc did during the season after a win in 2010 against the Lakers, and I think it's awesome. I think it's been shared before, but I'd love if you'd share it again.
You're talking about the locker room?
Yes.
Yeah. So that year we were kind of up and down. We were still winning because we were good, but we might win 3, lose 1, win 4, lose 2. We were kind of in a malaise, really, just kind of cruising along. And everybody knew, and all the sports people and media people were saying, the Lakers and Celtics are going to end up being in the finals. It's just a matter of time. We just got to play this season out, and then can't wait for the finals. So we're in L.A., and we had already played the Lakers one time in Boston. They beat us in Boston. So that L.A. game out in L.A., because you only play Western Conference teams twice a year, once at home, once away, that was somewhat of a statement game, even though no one talked about that. It was a big game. Going into that game, the Lakers, they wanted to prove to us, no, you can't beat us at your place, and you can't beat us here. So when we see you in June in the finals, just know that you beat us. So we end up winning the game. And after the game, just like all coaching staffs, we wait until the players all get in from the floor and have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to themselves before we walk in with our post-game message. So we won the game. I think we won 87-86. Hard-fought, intense game, man. I mean, players sweating their brains out, coaches sweating. Kobe wanted to rip the heart out of Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett wanted to rip the heart out of not just Kobe, but Paul Gasol and everybody else on the team, right? So we win. And Doc, you could see Doc's mind moving. Okay, we need to say something here. We need to say something. He looked at me and he said, any suggestions? How about saying good win, man? We got the win we wanted. Well, that was stupid. We wanted something deeper than that, right? So he looks at me and he says, just follow my lead. I'm good. So he walks in there and he said, guys, great win tonight. They wanted to beat us. We wanted to beat them. They wanted to rip our hearts out. I know you guys wanted to rip their hearts out too. I know you guys saw this as a statement game. But guys, we still have a month and a half left in the season. Okay, this isn't the end of our season. So here's what I want everybody in the room. There were 28 people in the room, counting security people, masseuses, team psychologists, all the things, managers, everybody, staff guy, everybody was in there. He said, everybody in this room, I want you to get $100 right now and give it to Kevin, meaning me. So everybody came up, boom, 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 boom. I had $2,800 in my hand. And Doc said, here's what we are going to do. We are going to hide this money in this locker room. And we all know that this is the locker room that every visiting team is in when you play the Lakers. We're going to hide this money somewhere in this locker room. And then we are going to come back in June and do two things. Number one, we are going to get our money back. And number two, we're going to kick the Lakers' ass. All 28 people could have run through 7,000 cinder block walls right then, right? So we hid the money. The way it's set up is there's the locker room here, and right attached to it, you just walk in the door from the locker room to the coach's locker room. We hid it above one of those ceiling tiles, those drop ceiling tiles in the coach's locker room. So, of course, we ended up both being in the finals. And, man, our guys ran back our first practice in L.A. at the Staples Center. They went into that locker room. They destroyed that locker room. Matter of fact, it probably cost us more than $2,800 to repair them trying to find the money. But here's the deal, what Doc did. He refocused the lens, right? He put gas in our tank, right? Because our gas was low at that point in the season. And he gave us hope and a vision for the rest of the year. And all great leaders do that. And they find unique ways to provide that for their team. And Doc was the best at that.
I love that story, and I love the idea of a bunch of millionaires running to get $100.
It didn't matter. Didn't matter. It was we did this.
Yep. That's great. So, Coach, in your corporate speaking world, have you met any? I mean, it's easy for a Kevin Garnett or a Doc Rivers to have stories written about them all the time, but there's obviously so many great leaders in the world in non-sport industries who may not get articles and attention. Is there an example or two of people you've come across that are fabulous leaders and a reason why?
Well, one guy that no one will never know his name probably, he may think everybody knows it, but they don't, is Carl Liebert. He was the vice president at USAA, the military branch of the insurance and banking, etc. A big company and an important company for our military men and women. So he used to do this thing, he called it summer school. And each summer during the year, he would leave his VP office and go somewhere and study something for 4 to 5 to 6 days, meaning he might go to Stanford. And then he would bring his study and his lessons learned back to the company and provide those lessons for everybody that he led. You see, it gets back to what we talked about at the very beginning. The most successful people in this world have a curiosity gene, and they know that they don't know it all. And Carl was a living example by doing his own summer school. We think of summer school as a negative thing you did in college, right? Because you weren't up to par in your studies. He took that concept as a very positive thing. And not only did he help himself get better those 4 to 6 days, he helped the company get better because he went back and shared those lessons. And that's what great leaders do. They share their knowledge. They share their experiences. They share their successes, and they share their failures.
That's a great story. I love that. I want to say Bill Gates kind of does something similar every year where he'll study, or maybe it's Mark Zuckerberg. But regardless, like you said, all great people and successful people do that. So, Coach, before we get to the few end of episode questions for you, where can people follow you if they want to follow along or learn more about you? And is there any chance, we'll link the book in the show notes, any chance we have another book coming out eventually?
Yeah, I mean, I'm toying around and playing with some things for a book, either on teamwork and team building, or I might go on leadership. So I have my skeleton outlines already laid out and that sort of thing. It's just I have to pull the trigger on it and really get focused. In terms of the book that I did write, it's called Why the Best Are the Best. 25 powerful words that impact, inspire, and define champions. And what this book is all about is simply I lay out in an easy to read, a quick read, the reasons why people become their best. And these reasons are things that any reader can insert into their lives immediately. You just have to make the decision to do that. So you can find out more about some of the things that I do and some of my blogs and newsletters, that sort of thing, by going to our website, kevineastman.net. And then also on my Twitter account, I put out there each and every day, well, 5 days a week. I take Saturday and Sunday off, but a quick hit bullet on either success, teamwork, leadership, professional development, moving up the ladder, culture, whatever. It's not a Twitter site where I tell you where I went to the bathroom yesterday and the results of that. It's not a Twitter about that. Now, unfortunately, because all the people who are supposedly experts in Twitter and promoting their own stuff, like my book, they say I have to put some of that stuff on there too. So the people who go and join my Twitter, don't worry about that stuff. Just get to the meat and potatoes. I'm good if you never buy the book, right? But there's a lot of meat and potatoes on the Twitter site, maybe over almost 4,000 quick hit bullet points now.
That's great. We'll link all that in the show notes. Coach, you've been through one more question before we get to the end of the episode questions, but you talked about you're on the road 60, 70 days a year doing corporate speaking events. We all talk about in life handling adversity and this, that, and the other, but obviously your profession was impacted a lot, like so many other people's this year. So I imagine you haven't been able to travel much. How has it been handling that, and how hard has it been for you to navigate that?
It really hasn't been that hard. I'm pretty good at going on to the next thing. My wife gets frustrated because she says, like, well, how can you do that? Like, aren't you supposed to like be pissed off for a while? Hey, I mean, I can't control it. I can control what I do about, the pandemic and how it maybe can't affect me by where we go and masks and all that sort of thing. So for me, what I just decided to do is, and it's really against everything that I talk about, I decided to kind of detox. Like, in other words, I was on the coaching treadmill going millions of miles an hour for 35 years. Then 2 days after I left the Clippers, I immediately jumped into speaking and went 100 miles an hour on speaking, doing 60 to 70 talks a year. And, that's probably, a talk is usually 2 days on the road when all is said and done. So 150 plus days on the road. And then what I finally decided to do was say, it's okay. Even though it's hard for me not to do this, it's okay not to read today if you don't want to. But I still do it. I just don't maybe do it 2 or 3 hours now. It's okay to not have a to-do list today. I wanted to detox a little bit and then get new energy. Almost saying to myself, it's okay to slow down a tad, which I've done. Now, my wife will say, well, you're still reading every day. You're still in your office taking your notes. Like, what are all those notes you're taking down? And you're still got 7 million highlighters that you're highlighting books with. But I'm doing it because I want to do it. That's kind of what I've done. And the other thing that I've done is I have 2 questions that I put in front of me each and every day. And they're the same questions. And one is, did I waste yesterday? Did I waste yesterday? And even though I'm slowing down, I don't feel I've wasted many days, right? And the second question is, how would I feel if I waste today? Because I think depending on how you answer each of those, it sets you up for today, right? And I just wanted to make sure that I got something out of my day. And getting something out of my day might have been just hanging out with Wendy all day, taking a drive. That's not wasting a day, right? So I just didn't want to come and sit and watch The Price is Right for 23 hours, right? Not that that's a bad show. It's the only thing that popped into my mind. So you're obviously a very highly motivated, driven, successful person. And I think that would describe most coaches. So what would your basically giving yourself a pass to slow down a little bit and not feel forced to do all these certain things, what would your advice be to other coaches and your younger self about doing that in their life? Even if let's say I'm coaching a college basketball team and we got our first game in a month, but trying to slow down a little bit and give yourself a break, what would your advice be about that? And what's been your biggest takeaway about this time? Well, the slow down for me was and I'll probably define it even better for the listeners. It was not always having to fill my day with things to do. I actually wanted to slow down and fill my day with things to think about, right? So self-reflection occurs every day during this pandemic. It's one of the things I try and do. And it might be 20 minutes here, 3 minutes here. Everyone thinks that, self-reflection, he must be up 18 hours a day thinking about what he should do. No, it says things pop into your head. I might be out, although people will say, no, that's impossible. You never go out there. But I might be out cleaning my garage. And the friends who know me might say, you've never done that in your life. Well, I might be thinking about, okay, if I want to do a book, how can I make it the best that I can make it, right? Or how can I start developing deeper relationships with, and I target 5 people, right? Just reflecting on where am I and what do I want to do next. So my idle time still is filled to the point where I don't waste my time. So, and it could be like one of the things that got me really deep into self-reflection. I was doing some notes on this earlier this morning. Was one of my favorite books, right? It's by Pete Carroll, Win Forever, and he at 49 years old, he was fired from the New England Patriots, and he had already been fired from the New York Jets, right? So he went on a deep self-reflection journey that year that he wasn't coaching, and so it got me thinking a little more even about. That's why I think reading is so important, because you get to learn from people that you'll never meet.
So that takes us into our first question for the set of end of episode questions, which is, what's one book you recommend for other coaches? So you just mentioned the Pete Carroll one. Is that the winner, or is there another one too?
Oh man, I should mention Why the Best Are the Best.
Oh, of course. We're linking that in the show notes for sure.
No, that would be like number 10. So, and gradually moving downward, leading to 11, 12, 70. For coaches, I think this book, Win Forever, Pete Carroll, you can see it, but the listeners can't. But because the biggest thing is it talked about how he had to own up to what he wasn't doing to be a good coach, and how once he self-reflected enough, and it wasn't brain surgery here. He took a yellow legal pad and a pen and started to just write things down that entered his head. And I do this, I do the same thing. I mean, it's just a yellow legal pad, and as I get thoughts, I'm writing them down. But had he not done this, all the stuff that's in the book, he feels he wouldn't be where he is today.
Very much like you just said, less doing, more thinking and putting your thoughts down and being in thought. So I love that. Who's one person you'd want to hear as a guest on this podcast?
Maybe a tie for first. One would be Eric Spoelstra, because of what he's been able to do, because he's seen success and failure. Lots of wins and championships and not so many wins some years, but he can sustain the success. And I think the Heat culture was brought out often during the playoffs. So just the curiosity of finding that. And then the other one would be maybe a name that some people won't know, and that's Lawrence Frank, the president of basketball operations for the Los Angeles Clippers. Because not only has he built by figuring out how to sign Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, people thought they couldn't do either. They were able to do that. Now, did they get as far as they wanted to go? No, and he'll be the first to admit that. But he is also helping form an incredible staff right now. People who read a lot about it seen that actually one of Eric's assistant coaches, Dan Craig, has now joined Ty Lue's staff. That's a tremendous get for T. Lue, right? And I know Lawrence was persistent helping T. Lue get there. Kenny Atkinson, the former coach of the Brooklyn Nets, it looks like Kenny's about ready to join their staff. So How does he build a team and a staff? What did you do, and how did you identify people? Because Lawrence often talks about you got to hire your gaps. You have to hire your gaps. Whatever gaps you have as a person, hire people to fill those gaps.
So what's one area you're looking to improve in over the next year?
Well, through self-reflection, one of the things is I want to refine my messaging in everything that I'm doing in the public venue, right, with my speaking. Just refine my messaging. And then probably, like I said earlier, improve the depth of some relationships.
What's popular advice you hear people say you think is wrong?
Well, I talk about this in the book. We've been taught since we were very young that the truth hurts. No, not for successful people. The truth actually helps. It may turn your ears red because you're embarrassed by it. It may even make you a little bit mad for a while. But to get to where you want to go, the truth will help you get there.
What's popular advice you have for young coaches who are listening to this?
Go deeper into your craft. Study it more. Be incredibly competent with the X's and O's. And then take it a step further, and this is where a lot of young coaches, they don't put any thought to. Think of adjustments that you may have to make during the course of a game. Just make some situations up, or watch every game on TV and try and figure out what adjustments a coach has made. Or coming out of a timeout, what is something that coach did that maybe they weren't doing the previous 10 possessions. So put thought to adjustments, and then truly evaluate how good a communicator you are. Because in today's game, a coach has to have the ability to connect with their players, to get into the heads of the players, to get the players thinking the way they think, to see the game the way they see the game. Because if there's a conflict between the two, I don't know that you can really become successful. So those would be some of the things.
I have to say it because it's top of mind because I just finished his book this past week. But Nick Nurse's book, he talked about when he was a young coach, he would watch games, and when there would be a side out of bounds play or a baseline out of bounds after a timeout, he'd pause it, walk through what he would do in that situation, and then play it, and then kind of judge the two against each other over time. So that exact same thing you're talking about worked out well for him.
Yeah, I'll say.
Last question for you, Coach. What's the darkest moment you experienced professionally, and how did you overcome it?
I don't see any moments as dark. They're just things that happened, and okay, what are you going to do? So I just welcome anything, positive or negative, as or perceived by others as negative, as something that has happened. Then I have to stop. Okay, what was my part in this being what it was? And then analyzing that, having a plan to hopefully never have that happen again, and then moving on. So, and that's where my wife always says, I hate it that you can just keep moving on from things. I really don't sit here and think that anything was considered dark. Maybe it's just a weird mindset that I have. I don't know.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a blast. I could talk to you for another 5 hours, but I look forward to having you back when the new book is out eventually.
There you go. Thanks, Colby.
You've been listening to the Coaching Coaches Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and receive our world-class newsletter in your inbox every Sunday. You can access both of those at coachingcoaches.co. Once again, that's coachingcoaches.co.